Glenn, good evening. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Yes, definitely looking forward to chatting with you and hearing a little bit more about your story. And I will admit this: I don't know a whole lot about your story. We just kind of connected very recently here, but I know you are a thru hiker, and you're also the founder of Gossamer Gear, which is, of course, a company that I'm familiar with, having been in the thru hiking space as well. So lots to learn from you today, and I've been, I'm looking forward to this for sure. But as I like to start any episode where I feature a guest, I do like to go back to the beginning a little bit because every great story has a beginning. So that's where I'd like to start with you as well. So just generally speaking, what kind of drew you to the outdoors initially?
Well, when I was a kid, we spent time outdoors. I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up before the internet. And so, we were outside all day. My mom would shoo us outside. We grew up without a TV because my mom thought it would rot our minds. If you wanted to know something, read a book. Otherwise, we were outside and we knew as long as we were home for dinner, she didn't know where we were and didn't worry about it. So we spent a lot of time outside. And then on weekends, my mom and dad would take us camping in his International Harvester truck. And, we had the big tent, the Coleman stove, the Coleman lanterns. But so that's, I still remember the smell of the pine trees and the sun on the water. So I grew up in the West, kind of spending time outside.
So where are you from originally?
I was born in Southern California, the Los Angeles area.
Okay. So, but like with quick access to nature, it sounds like it's been a while since I've been to California, so I'm trying to picture the state in my head. But if I remember correctly, is it more like eastern Los Angeles, like just right outside the city? There's a good amount of green space, something like that.
Well, we would head. I mean, there's mountains you can hike in and camp in. Actually, we were in the west end of the San Fernando Valley, and so heading to the coast. I mean, the Tongas, or not the Tongas. Gosh, I've been gone too long. Anyways, there's a coastal range of mountains there that just a bunch of fire roads and public land that you can go. And then, of course, if you head up the state, you're in the Sierras pretty quickly. So you get all sorts of mountains then.
I certainly agree with your sentiment. Like I also grew up in the era of analog as well before the internet and everything. Well, I did have like regular Nintendo and those Super Nintendo game consoles. So I kind of was one of those kids that got, swept into those quite a bit. But even still, my parents kind of had the same mindset that it sounded like yours was like, all right, just turn the game off. Your cousins are over. You get outside, play. Don't come back till it's dark when dinner's ready. So yeah, I certainly share that same sentiment as well.
Yeah. And I think, I noticed, and I don't know why it's changed, but it seems like kids today, it's more structured. Their time after school or during the summer is more structured. They're signed up for bike camps or ski camps or, activities. And man, I'm so glad I grew up when I had an unstructured life. It's just like go outside and amuse yourself. It's not like we had toys or anything. It's just like, go dig a hole or run around, climb a tree, whatever. We learned how to amuse ourselves without needing stuff to do it.
Well, I think that also just fostered our curiosity quite a bit and our imagination because, with us not really having very much in the way of screens or anything like that and just being outside, we had to utilize our imagination, like you said, to amuse ourselves, where I feel like in this day and age with like so many children having tablets now and like these very, very real video games and everything, it seems like they don't really have to utilize their imagination because like their, I guess, mental span is, already being filled with artificial imagination. I don't know if that's the correct term there, but I think you might get my meaning though. It's just like there's not a whole lot of room in this day and age for kids to express their imagination or their curiosity, it seems.
Yeah, or they're doing it digitally. They're creating digital stuff instead of going out and making forts and and tree houses. I remember my mom was a pacifist, so she refused we never had any toy guns, but I would take like a stick of balsa wood and put like a little nail in the end and pretend that was a gun. You know, it's like you say, imagination. You can make anything in your mind if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So at like what point in your life did the outdoors kind of become more of a involved thing? Because like I said, and I'm kind of getting into like you hiking a little bit more here. What were some of your early hiking memories? And did it begin in California or did you maybe go elsewhere to kind of get more involved in nature in this way? What did that look like for you?
Well, my parents divorced when I was in fourth grade. And then my mom, who had graduated from Wellesley and so felt kind of more of comfort with the East Coast, threw us three kids and a couple dogs and cats and mice into her van and drove across the country. And so we ended up on the East Coast in Massachusetts. So she joined the local Appalachian Mountain Club, and I remember going on some hikes. But really, probably the start of my adventuring was in 1976. I graduated high school and decided I was going to ride my bicycle across the country, which I have no idea why, looking back on it. It just, I like to ride the bike and I like to camp. I did some camping in Boy Scouts. I was in Boy Scouts back east, but they didn't really do any trips. They had like campsites in the woods that we'd go to on weekends, and each patrol had their little campsite, and you'd do some lashing and, make fires. And I mean, it was fun, but it wasn't like we were going backpacking. So really my first kind of big adventure was doing that bicycle trip in 1976.
And you said this was just right out of high school. So you were maybe like 18, 19 years old at the time?
I was 17. I turned 18 on the trip.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a little bit unheard of. I mean, well, I thought me going into the Marine Corps at age 18 was impressive, but to do like, a cross country bike trek, and were you by yourself or did you kind of have like some support along the way?
There was no support along the way, but I had three friends that when they found out about my plan said, "Hey, can we come? That sounds like a great idea." So there were four of us doing the trip, but I mean, I just shake my head thinking about it now. I mean, there was, of course, no cell phones, no helmets. We were just out there. I called my mom twice in 6 weeks. We did 4,200 miles. She didn't worry about it. I was like, he's got the skills to figure things out. And we would, at this time, gas stations gave out free paper maps, road maps. So when we got into a new state, we'd pull off at a gas station, go in and pick a free highway map and kind of figure out which route was going to get us in about the right direction and keep pedaling. So it was a blast.
And you said that this took you about 6 weeks to make it across?
It was either 6 or 8. I can't remember. And one guy kept a journal, so I should figure that out and then remember it. But
and did you start from Massachusetts? You said that that's where you were living. Is that where the starting
lived
point?
In Western Massachusetts. We lived in Amherst, Mass. So that's where we started. We had at the town common. Got a picture somewhere of my mom and a couple parents and friends. Kind of, I think they had a ribbon that we rode through to start, or some little celebration, and then we were off.
And what was the final ending point? I'm gonna go on a limb here and say that it was Los Angeles, like you were returning home, or was it someplace else?
No, it was San Francisco. Just kind of the way it worked out. I started with a not very scientific. I mean, with the internet, people don't understand like how hard it was to research stuff, which was, I think, kind of good. I still to this day like my outdoor adventure less curated as opposed to more.
Agreed.
And so just figuring it out along the way is part of the fun. And so I had a map from a gas station or AAA or something of the whole country. And I took a blue highlighter and started at Amherst and just kind of made a line across the map, across the whole country. And then when we got into a state, we'd kind of look at the highways and how they lined up with the blue line. And, we ended up in San Francisco.
Okay. Now, being at the age of 17 and doing this, and of course, we're talking about a time where I'm not sure Western Unions were very popular for people to wire you money, and then maybe debit cards probably weren't like a thing either. I would assume so. Then again,
Nobody,
I don't know offhand. So I guess how does a 17-year-old achieve something like this financially? I guess can you take us tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, I didn't keep any records. Maybe I thought the journal was too heavy, but one of the guys did keep a record, and it's super interesting because he kept meticulous notes on the money he spent. So just seeing like how much stuff costs, like you could get a hamburger meal, I think it was a meal at Burger King for 97 cents. And so we did our share of fast food, and we didn't really stay in hotels. We were camping. So pitching tents and rest stops, things like that, or in people's yards. There's a story on that I can tell later. So back then, when you wanted to travel, there's no ATMs, no credit cards, no nothing. You took American Express traveler's checks.
Mm.
That was the bomb. You know, you signed them all, and then you had to countersign them in front of us, you know, at a store or post office or bank or something, and then you got cash. So we had American Express traveler's checks.
Was there any particular part of that route that just was probably more difficult that maybe really stands out in your mind? Because I feel like doing an adventure like this one, you're bound to run into some trouble along the way. Hopefully, not catastrophic trouble, but misadventures are bound to happen. I feel like it's not a matter of if they do, it's a matter of when they do. So, is there any particular moments that might stand out in your mind that might have been frustrating during the moment, but you ultimately got through it?
Well, you know, unfortunately, it's like looking back on it, I remember the hills were steep the first day we left in the Berkshires and the last day coming into those hills that ring San Francisco. Those were like the steepest hills. Like, I don't remember even going over the Rockies being as bad as the first and last days. And looking at the one guy's journal, there were things about rain that it seemed like it was raining a lot. And I have no memory of riding in the rain at all. You know, I just remember the sunny times. I mean, I remember, you know, instances like one of the guys fell asleep on his bike once and crashed. You know, I remember I did get two flat tires and they were both in the state of Utah. I remember that. But I don't remember a lot of troubles. Although reading back the guy's notes, we did, you know, he had some bicycle troubles. He had so he had a lot more flats. I don't remember any of that.
It's really interesting how, you know, two people or more can pretty much have like the exact same experience, but like interpret it differently in some way. You know, I guess like, because I feel like day in and day out writing that long, you know, your mind can go in so many different ways. So many thoughts can come to mind when you're kind of just sort of coasting. So it's just like, yeah, someone just might remember all the rain, but maybe during that time your mind was elsewhere when the rain was happening. So it's interesting how team dynamics kind of work like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just my general optimism or my bad memory. You know, I just don't remember it. So, yeah, no, it was a great trip. Just being, you know, young and just the bicycle and just figuring it out day after day, figuring out where we're going to be that night and buying food along the way. We didn't want to carry a lot of stuff. So like for lunch, we would stop at a store. We'd buy a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly. And then we'd just sit in a circle and we'd make sandwiches. You'd make your sandwich and then eat it, pass everything to the guy on your left. They'd start making a sandwich. And by the time everything came back around to you, you were done with that sandwich. You'd make another sandwich. So we just eat the entire loaf, both jars, so we didn't have to carry anything, and then hike on, or bike on in this case. Yeah.
You know, I actually did a bike trek myself a while back. Well, by a while back, I mean about like 10 years ago. I told you briefly before we hit record here that I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. And the country that I was placed in was the Gambia, small country just on the west coast there. It's just kind of like a linear strip of land coming in off the Atlantic, 300 miles across. But I actually did cycle the entire length of it shortly before I left there. Took me about a week to do the 300 miles. And I just stayed at different Peace Corps volunteers villages along the way. But I kind of remember just that was a little bit tricky because it was sort of similar to your trek, is that I didn't really have very much in the way of like internet connectivity, just like living, in this rural village. So, but the Peace Corps did give me a map of the country. So just looking at this paper map and trying to figure out what's where and how many miles it takes to get here and try to guesstimate how long that would take me and so on and so forth. So it was kind of fun planning the trip that way. And it was actually a bit of a gamble at times because it's like I'm trying to think to myself, well, I'm definitely going to need to stop to get water, or I'm going to have to stop and get more snacks. What villages are along the road here? And hopefully those villages have working water taps because, again, it's a developing country. So that is very much up in the air there. But it's just, I feel like that was a trip that really taught me to be resourceful because I as well I had like bike issues where I had to swap out like flat tubes, or I had like to repair a link in my chain or something like that. And it just also just taught me to remain calm under those types of situations. Cause it's like, if you start getting all irritable when you're out there, it's not going to make the situation any better. It's just going to make it worse. So those were some of the lessons that I took away from that.
Yeah, no, and in your situation, you never know about road conditions and there's all sorts of unknowns, but yeah, same principle for sure.
Yeah. And another thing that I had to deal with was there was a lot of police and military checkpoints as well. And I actually did get in trouble. Well, not on the bike trek, but just at a checkpoint in general. I have this bag that I keep all my hygienics in, like my toothbrush and my soap and everything. And it's camouflage colored because I had it from my time in the Marine Corps. And in the Gambia, only active military personnel in the country are allowed to pretty much wear or own like camouflage colored anything. So when this soldier at a checkpoint was searching my bag and he saw that, he got very livid with me. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, something bad's about to happen here. So I'm like, hey, easy, man. We're brothers. See, we're brothers.
Yeah.
So, but that was the only time I had like an issue at a checkpoint, and so nothing with the trek itself. So that was good.
Yeah. Good.
All right. So now transitioning from long distance bike riding to being on foot and hiking, what did that look like for you? What was kind of like sort of the first major trail that you sought out to do? How old were you at the time? So yeah, give us the details on that.
Well, and I don't consider myself a thru hiker. I mean, I've done most of Pacific Crest Trail, but in sections. I've done chunks of the AT and the CDT. I mean, I guess I've thru hiked the Tahoe Rim Trail, the Wonderland Trail, but those are 3-day affairs. So actually, kind of once I got back out I rode down the coast myself to Los Angeles. I started working. Then I went to college, got an engineering degree, got a master's in business, got married, had kids. So it was really didn't do much in the way outdoor adventuring until our oldest son, Brian, got into Boy Scouts. And we had a very active troop in Oceanside, California, a lot of backpacking, canoe trips, summer camp, everything. So that's when kind of I got back into backpacking with the Scouts. And about that same time, a friend of mine decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in sections. And so I ended up doing a fair amount of hiking with him.
Gotcha. Now, what was your initial hiking style? Like, I know eventually you kind of got to a point where you became more of like the minimalist, like a backpacker, and we'll kind of sort of dive into what that looks like here in a minute. But was that how you started your hiking journey, or were you maybe a little bit more in tune to having creature comforts with you on the trail. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it wasn't so much creature comforts. My gear from when I was in Boy Scouts was still back east. I didn't have it with me. So when Brian, our son, and I were getting ready for our first week-long trek in the Sierras with Scouts, I went down to REI and said, we're going to be gone on Sierra for a week. What do I need? And so, we loaded up with big internal frame backpacks and super warm sleeping bags and, MSR stove, pots, all that kind of stuff, just whatever they said we needed pretty much. We kind of took lighter inflatable sleeping pads, as I recall. Didn't think we needed like the big, thick plush ones, but generally we just kind of loaded up. And so my pack for that first Sierra trek weighed 70 pounds fully loaded.
Oh, wow.
And about this time, a couple things happened. One, I saw how tough it was for the scouts, some of them, 14, 15, carrying these huge loads. And two, Ray Jardine published his first book, his Pacific Crest Trail Hiker's Handbook, and talking about how to go ultralight and how he through hiked the PCT with a 8 pound and change base pack weight. And so my buddy Reed Miller, actually, who was the scoutmaster of the troop, got that book and read it and then gave it to me to read it. And it's like, this, we got to lighten up the boys and everything's going to be better. And so that's when I started tinkering, because my mom felt that every kid should leave home knowing how to cook, bake, and sew. Just, she considered those basic life skills. So I knew how to sew. So my pack that I'd gotten at REI weighed 7.5 pounds empty. So I sewed one that weighed under a pound. And just, made some tarps and just kind of went from there.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like I'm not quite to that point yet of minimalism myself as a hiker. Let's see, when I told you I did my through hike across Michigan. I'm trying to remember, what was my base weight? 17 maybe, but it started at around 17, but it may have gotten up to about 20 once winter hit, because I started kind of late in the year. I started in like late August, and I don't know if you've been in Michigan during winter time, but snows can creep up on you pretty fast. So that's so I'm not quite to the whole minimalist style yet, but you make an interesting point though when you're talking about how you're trying to lighten the load of your scout troop, is that it's just getting back to the basics of our basic needs. I mean, as long as you have shelter of some kind, and then of course food and the means to get water, you're pretty much good to go at that point, really.
Yeah, you've experienced minimalism probably more on a daily basis than I have, particularly your Peace Corps service in Africa. I mean, for most of the world, minimalism isn't like a fancy new thing. It's just how they live.
Right.
And for me, I can't say that my life probably looks that minimal on a day-to-day basis. The backpack, there's some lessons from that I take. But when I'm backpacking, my load's pretty light, and it's always amazing to me how little you need to be healthy and safe and having fun.
Yeah, I'm definitely someone who, I like having nice things as much as the next person, of course. But I feel like getting out in the wild, like we're talking about here, or in just me reflecting on my time in Peace Corps, I guess it's always nice to be reminded that yes, it's nice to have all these things, but if I were to lose them tomorrow for whatever reason, my life is not going to be crippled like as a result of it. Where, I have some people in my life who I won't name, so I don't throw them under the bus here necessarily, but it's just like, if they lost Wi-Fi for a couple of hours, it's like the end of the world for them, where it's like, but like when I was in Peace Corps, if I wanted internet access, I had to hop on my bike and I had to ride it 18 miles to the nearest internet cafe. and hopefully there was a computer open that I can get on. And also hopefully the internet was actually working that day, because you got about a coin flip chance of the internet actually working when you get there. But at the same time, though, it's just that was one of the moments in my life where I felt like I was the most at peace because, well, for one, I slept really well because when the sun went down and I had no electricity or running water, it's just, well, what else was I really supposed to do other than just like go to sleep? I mean, yes, I could maybe light a candle to see a little bit in my hut or use my headlamp, but that'll just drain the battery. So, I mean, what else is there really for me to do? I might as well just go to sleep and get a good night's sleep and don't really have an alarm clock trying to wake me up the next morning either.
Well, and the other thing I imagine of your time there is, I don't know how your life is now, but there's like a million things that I'm thinking about that I need to do. I need to work on my taxes. There's like a ton of things I need to do. But when you're hiking, it's like it boils down to, I mean, you can't do anything really because you got no internet. You can't do any of the stuff on your to-do list. All you need to do is like walk and figure out where the next water is and where you're going to camp tonight. You know what I mean? And so without all those things rattle around in your mind, you've got time to just think about things or think about nothing, or it's so rare. I think you probably experience it on a daily basis in the Peace Corps, but in our life here in America, I think that's so rare to be just so unplugged, to have time to just let your mind wander.
Absolutely. And a good example of that was just, this afternoon, I work here in San Antonio, Texas, and I live here too. And today for my day job, I'm an archaeologist. Like I told you, I had to go downtown, which is, the heart of the city. So very, very busy and lots of road construction happening right now. So some of our major highways have like lane closures and everything. And there was just so much traffic. And it's just, I feel like, yeah, just living day to day, in modernity, I guess I'll say, it's maddening sometimes, with the traffic, the hustle and bustle, and, the watch kind of sort of dictating our lives to an extent too, where it's just, going back to what we talked about, just being able to get out into nature a little bit is just, the days just for one feel like so long. Like I remember just hiking across Michigan, how long the days felt because I literally had nothing that was just like getting my mind, nothing got my mind going like 100 miles a minute. It's just, I was just present, I guess is the best way I think I can put it.
Yeah. And the time doesn't matter, when you're hiking or if you're living in Africa, it's the sun. When it's light, you walk, and when it's dark, you sleep. And it doesn't really matter what time it is. When you're hungry, you eat. When you're thirsty, you drink. And it's just so refreshing sometimes to get back to that simplicity.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to throw a little bit of a curveball question, something funny that I just kind of sort of thought of. When I was hiking through Michigan, and in Michigan's Lower Peninsula, a part of the North Country Trail that I was hiking goes through Wexford County, Michigan, and Wexford County is supposedly where the first sighting of Michigan's cryptid was first reported back in like the late 19th century. We have the Michigan Dogman is kind of our cryptid. And I remember I actually set up camp in the Manistee National Forest, which goes through Wexford County. And I'm on top of this plateau, pretty close to the edge. There's the river valley down below me. And I swear I heard wolves, or at least a wolf howling, followed by the shrieking and the wailing of a bunch of coyotes. So, and I did kind of get some sound recording, and I like posted it on my social media. And one of the trail angels that I stayed with that was in the area, she says, "Oh no, we don't have any wolves here. Those are just coyotes that you're hearing." And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that I heard a wolf. Like there was a wolf down there for sure. Cause I have heard because I did hear like a pack of wolves howling when I was going through the Upper Peninsula. So that sound is still in my memory. So I couldn't help but think to myself, wait a second, was that the Michigan dog man like harassing like, the small little pack of coyotes? So I guess getting back to you now, was there like ever a moment during any of your hikes where something kind of maybe scared you like that, or something just kind of unusual happened, and anything of the sort?
Well, the one I can think of is there's probably a couple, but the one that comes to mind is I was backpacking with some friends up above Santa Barbara, the Sespe Wilderness in there. And the Native Americans lived there, years ago. And there's still a bunch of art kind of on rock, well, yeah, you know all about this.
Yeah, cave art.
Yeah. And so we were, I forget, there were four of us and the other two had to go somewhere. One guy had to leave, so I left with him. Anyway, I think there were two of us that camped one night, just cowboy camping near this big, this rock art. And I had the strangest dreams that night, which now I don't remember, but I remember making a connection when we were sleeping there. It's like, oh, there's something different about this place for sure.
Which makes you wonder if you want to camp there again in the future, eh?
I don't think I would. I don't remember them being really bad, but they weren't really pleasant. I don't know.
Well, probably sounds like it shook you up a little bit, like the next day before you stepped off.
I noticed it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Just something I'm kind of curious about, because that was one of the questions that I actually got like after I completed my trek. Someone asked me, was there anything that happened that kind of like sort of got my ideas or maybe even my beliefs going on the paranormal or the supernatural? And that sort of came to mind. And that, and also being near Lake Superior, because there was a good stretch of trail that goes along Lake Superior, and I heard some pretty eerie stories from some of the locals there. One of the locals told me this story about how three men went out on a rowboat out into Lake Superior. Now, Lake Superior has kind of an ominous nickname, and we call her the lake that never gives up her dead. And so these three men went out on this rowboat, and they never came back. And when they sent like rescue divers out there to scour the bottom of the lake, they found the boat. And also, but I didn't really like fact check this, so I'm just going to go off of what this gentleman told me. But apparently, the boat was at the bottom of the lake, sitting upright. Two of the men were still sitting like in their seats, like in the boat upright, while the other one was just kind of toppled over the side. And so a part of me thinks to myself, how on earth would this boat sink to where the men would still be sitting inside it? Like, how does that work? But it was very, very eerie to hear that story. And also, like, when I had to hike so close to that lake, and also that lake really did kind of scare the heck out of me too, because the forecast could call for like a 0% chance of rain all day. And suddenly here comes a wall of rain off the lake. So she's just a powerful force of nature that just will do whatever she wants, really.
Yeah.
All right. So I know that you have an entrepreneurial journey that you set out to later on as well. And you ended up founding Gossamer Gear. Was it back in 1998? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. I started making pack. I made a pack for myself. And, then as we hiked along on scout hikes and hikes with Reed, I thought of things that could be improved. And so I made a second pack, and, so on until the fourth pack, the so-called G4, seemed like it fit my needs right then. And I thought it'd been optimized. So I put the plans on the internet. This is early internet days, so that anyone who wanted one could make one for free. And I kept getting inquiries saying, hey, could you make me a pack? I don't know how to sew, and I don't know anyone that knows how to sew. But I couldn't. I was working long hours. I could not afford to make packs for people in my, quote, spare time. So I was discussing this with the ladies at Quest Outfitters in Florida, where I got my fabric from. And they said, well, we have an industry magazine that, here's a cut and sew operation on your coast, at least up in Seattle. So I contacted Monty and explained I wanted some packs made. And he says, "Oh yeah, we've made packs, no problem." He says, "Our minimum order is 100." And I said, "Well, that's a problem because I'm pretty sure there's only 25 people that want a pack." And we went back and forth and finally settled on 50 packs. I figured they'd be in my garage for the next 5 years, but somehow I'd eventually get rid of them. And so I sent Monty up a completed G4 pack that I'd sewn and some fabric and stuff so he could make one. And we went back and forth with questions on the pattern and everything. And I distinctly remember a phone call where I'm talking to him. He says, "These are not like the other packs we've made." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. It's something different. That's why it's so much lighter." So we finally got the design. He got the design down pat and got to work. And our son Brian put up a rudimentary website where people could fill out an order form that would send me an email. And, I'm figuring we're going to sell 25 packs. I'm not going to think about a business name or anything. I just use my initials, called it GVP Gear. And I'm sitting there at my desk at home, and suddenly like an email pops up and it's the first order. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought this through. So I grabbed a yellow line pad of paper and wrote it down, and then got another order, wrote that on the next line. And I still have those, that yellow line pad of paper with those early orders, actually the first couple thousand orders. So before Monty had even finished making the 50 packs, we had 86 orders.
Wow.
So I thought, this might not work out the way I thought. So we had to order more fabric, and then, we were off to the races, making packs and shipping them out. We charged $70, and that included priority mail shipping per pack.
That's a great deal, especially in this by today's standards. That's a pretty great
deal.
deal.
25 years later, it still looks like a good deal. And part of it was I was just trying to cover costs, because if you're going to sell 25 packs, it's not like you're going to make any money at it. So why bother? Just cover the costs and sell them cheap.
So what advice would you have for maybe, let's say, any aspiring entrepreneurs listening to the show? Because I feel like with the endeavor that you sought out for putting together physical products, in my opinion, maybe along with like brick and mortar, like businesses, like restaurants, we'll just say, I would say are probably among the hardest ventures to start off, because again, you got to think about manufacturing, and then, dealing with like prototypes, getting everything just right into the standards that you wanted. And then, of course, starting off, you're the customer service, you're the shipping department, you're all these like other things that I'm sure eventually you would outsource to other people to do. But starting off, it's probably your responsibility. So a lot of that can be kind of heavy at first, because it's long hours. You probably got to have like some of your own upfront personal costs invested into this too. So would you have any advice for maybe any like aspiring entrepreneurs, just to maybe kind of help them weather that initial storm if they were to start off pursuing something?
I do have some advice, and I'm never sure how applicable my personal experience is to other people. But you are right. The manufacturing was always a bear. I mean, first it was Seattle. And over the years, we tried, there were hippies in Colorado. There was someone in Albuquerque briefly. We had actually a pretty good shop going in Colorado for a while. We tried Mexico. And yeah, the manufacturing was always a challenge. I guess my advice would be consider not quitting your day job. So I never took any money from Gossamer Gear and always worked full time, usually 60 hours plus, doing the engineering. And while certainly my family paid a price in terms of my time, I could make what I wanted. I didn't have to worry. I didn't care if it sold or not, because it didn't make me any money. So people would say, "Oh, I think you ought to sew such and stuff." It's like, no, I'm making what I want. And if you think that would work for you, then you can buy it. And if you don't, then buy something else. I don't really care, or make your own pack. And so our early line of packs actually traced like my progression in getting lighter, with the G4, and then we had a G5, and then briefly even a G6. So the G5 weighed like 8 ounces, made out of spinnaker fabric, and then the G6 was, I think, 3.5 ounces out of spinnaker and super light stuff as my load got lighter. But I think, and our sons have actually done this, kept their day jobs to give them the freedom on their side gigs, to their creative freedom. I guess you can do what you want without the pressure of having to make rent or to pay off the credit card or whatever the case may be.
So you started off making packs initially, but of course now where Gossamer Gear is, of course, there's other types of products that you have in your lineup as well. You have shelters, accessories, and a few other things as well. Do you recall how long it took you in business, where you actually maybe felt like you were at a good point to where you maybe could kind of start experimenting with the manufacturing and the selling of different types of products versus just packs? Like around like what point in this journey do you think you felt good enough to do that?
I'd have to look. It was probably like a couple years in. Once I got the pack where I wanted it, then I started messing around with shelters. And so once I had our sill shelter was like my original thing, pretty very simple, but very light. Um, and so when I got that to where I was happy where I was using it, then we started selling that. And I wanted lighter trekking poles. So for a long time, I was making trekking poles in my garage, non-collapsible. They just cut to length, fixed length poles. I got the carbon fiber from England for some reason, and the cork handles from Oklahoma, and they were shaped by hand. So when I got a big box of them, you had to lay them out and pair them up that kind of looked the same because they were all slightly different. So you had to be careful to like go through and like, well, this one looks pretty close to that one. Okay, that's a pair, and because they weren't standardized at all. And then I used to buy Lecky tips, online or from stores, wherever I could scrounge them, and then glue those on the bottom and ship them off.
So going through all of this, and like we kind of talked about as we got into this part of our conversation, just how much is involved with launching a business, and also to make a business successful in the end too. Lots of time, lots of energy, lots of sacrifice, just as well too. But during this time, like you said, you were still working your day job, and then of course you have your responsibilities as a husband and father that you have to fulfill, and of course just even obligations to yourself too, making sure you're looking after yourself, and getting those escapes out in nature, like we talked about too, so you don't burn yourself out in the end. So. And maybe that was the case back then, and perhaps it could be even relevant to today. Maybe you're still, trying to find that balance. I guess I'll say, if balance is even possible. I don't know, but it's just how do you kind of go about managing all those different roles and responsibilities you have, so that way you show up effectively in all of them?
Well, I didn't show up effectively in all of them. I definitely did a substandard job as a husband and a father. My boys appear to have made their peace with it, and my wife and I next month, no, a couple of months, will be married 42 years,
Oh,
which is more a credit to her stubbornness than my performance as a husband for many of those years. But I got to the point where I realized it wasn't sustainable. I was working 60 plus hours a week doing the engineering and another 30 hours a week doing Gossamer Gear. And I realized, yeah, this this doesn't end well if I just can't keep it up. So about this time, I was serving on the board of the Pacific Crest Trail Association, and we were at a meeting talking about kind of board meeting, talking about possible board members. And Henry Shires of Tarp Tent says, what about John Mackey? And I said, well, who's John Mackey? And he says, co-founder of Whole Foods Market, of course. And I go, oh, okay. Um, and he was a big customer of Henry's. Besides being a super competitive and visionary businessman, obviously, he's a huge hiker. And so Henry said, well, we should see if he wants to join the board. Be a great addition. And so I looked when I got home, looked at my yellow line pad, and there was a lot of John Mackey names on that. He'd ordered a lot of packs from me. I just didn't know the name, so it
Oh,
didn't
wow.
didn't figure on that. And so about this time, I had kind of gotten a little reputation as a guy with a light pack, and so John was interested in meeting me, I guess, to talk gear. He loves to talk gear, and so we set it up that I would fly out with the executive director of the PCTA, Liz Bergeron at the time, to Boulder, where Mackey lives part of the year, and buy him dinner and pitch being a member of the board. So I get back home, and a couple weeks later, Liz calls me and says, "Hey, you need to follow up with John Mackey and see if he wants to join the board." So by this time, I had come to the conclusion that I had to wrap up Gossamer Gear and close it down because I couldn't do both. One paid me well, the other paid me zero, and I got a mortgage, kids to put through college. Yeah, it's
Right.
not a fun decision, but fairly obvious. And so I follow up with Mackey, and as I'm hanging up, I say, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to close down Gossamer Gear. So if you want to buy anything, you need to do it in the next couple of weeks." And he said, "Well, don't do anything till I call you back. I'm going out on a hike." And so he calls me back and he says, "Well, I got a proposal for you." He says, "I think Gossamer makes good products. I think the company needs to survive. I will buy 75% of the company. I want you to stay involved designing new stuff, and I'll put more money in, hire someone to run it, and you can be as involved or uninvolved as you have time and energy for."
Wow.
And so I said, okay, I didn't see a downside. And so that's, then he brought on people who built the company to what it is today.
Amazing. It's so interesting how things work out like that sometimes too, just the connections we make and what kind of paths that may open up for us.
Yeah. I mean, without that connection, it's a thin thread. If I hadn't volunteered to be on the PCTA board, I wouldn't have known that John Mackey was a customer or who he was. I wouldn't have met with him, wouldn't have. And if the timing, I mean, I might have closed it down before I met him. The timing was perfect. And, but for that chance series of events, Gossamer Gear could be a footnote right now, People would be going, Gossamer Gear, wasn't that a company back in like 2005 or something? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it might have a Wikipedia page. Who knows?
Yeah. Maybe, probably not even. Yeah.
All right. Well, kind of going off of this idea of making connections, I want to go back to something you mentioned to me earlier on in this conversation. And you were talking about when you did your bike trek across the country, there were a couple of moments that you stayed with people. And I definitely have my share of stories of like people that I stayed with when I did when I did my through hike across Michigan. But I want you to go first on this. What was that like? Kind of meeting people along the way and having them welcome you into their homes?
So the one that sticks in my mind is in Chatsworth, Illinois. And a lot of times we stayed in rest stops, but if we were, in a small town and it was about end of the day, time to stop, we would often go up and knock on a door and say, "Hey, the 4 kids were riding our bicycles across the country. Can we camp on your front lawn tonight?" And I never remember anyone saying no. So this one particular evening, I go up, knock on the door. This old gentleman, and I'm thinking he was in his 70s or 80s, but I was 17 at the time, so I can't tell you, but I just kind of remember him being old. He says, "Yeah, of course." And he was, interested in what we were doing. So he says, "I think you'd be more comfortable on the side yard." So we're getting unpacked and setting up tents and stuff. And he comes out and he says, "What time do you guys leave in the morning?" And I said, well, we've got miles to do. We like to get an early start before it gets too hot, usually around 7-ish. And he looked disappointed and explained that his wife had really bad arthritis and it was particularly brutal in the morning. And they would have loved to make us a proper breakfast to see us off, but it was just early in the morning was just impossible for his wife to get up and do a breakfast. And so, we told him, well, we don't expect that. That's very nice of you, but we've got food. We don't need anything. Thank you. And, it's enough that you're letting us camp here. So he comes out a little later and brings us a thing of little Hostess mini donuts, the assorted ones. He says, since we can't make you breakfast, at least we'd like to give you this. And again, we said, no, you don't owe us anything. This is great. Thanks. So the next morning, it's 7 o'clock ish. The sun's up. We're packing up, and the door to their house opens, and the man beckons us to come over. So, we're thinking he wants to say goodbye or something. So he ushers us into the house, and his wife had gotten up, worked through the pain, and made an amazing breakfast. I mean, there were eggs and bacon and sausage and potatoes and pancakes and coffee and juice. And I'm pretty sure they probably spent their entire weekly grocery allotment on us that morning. I don't know. They probably had oatmeal the rest of the week. But that just so touched me that, in spite of the pain, it's like, no, we're going to make these boys breakfast. We're going to be a part of their journey. And I've been telling that story for almost 50 years. And I like to think that that couple told that story as long as they lived from the other side. It's like, remember that day, that summer of 76, when those 4 boys, remember how much they ate? I mean, I wonder where they are now and what are they doing? And, of course, it's pre-internet, so we couldn't keep in touch. But, just really touched that people want to be part of what you're doing and help out.
Yeah. And well, I think they also kind of get a sense of just, how tough what you're doing is too. And I have a similar story. And it's stories like that, I feel like if there's ever a moment where someone is losing faith in humanity, like if they have a bad experience, with another person, and then hearing stories like that and just, be reminded that there's so many incredible people out there. And when I was hiking across Michigan, when you're talking about, the older lady working through the pain, I had a similar situation like that. Of course, my trek is a little bit different than yours because, I did have a smartphone, and there were a lot of places where I had pretty decent reception, so I could research stuff if I needed to. And there is an online Facebook community for the North Country Trail that is very active. And someone had made a comment with one of my posts and said, hey, if you need a place to stay, it looks like you're about to go through this area. There's this cabin resort nearby. And lo and behold, this cabin resort, after I read that comment, was just about 7 miles up the trail from me, and was nearing sort of the end of the day. So I'm like, perfect. Okay, now I have a place to stay. I tried calling ahead of time, but didn't reach anyone. So I wasn't able to make a reservation or let anyone know that I was coming. So I was hoping they'd be okay with kind of a surprise walk-in. And I explained to the gentleman who is working there, who owns it, and I told him I was doing this for a veterans fundraiser, the through hike that is. And he says, well, since you're doing this for the veterans, half off for you for the night. And he gave me one of his cabins. And as I'm kind of getting situated and sorting through my gear, doing all my, I guess, post-hiking day chores, I suppose, I see this old woman slowly walking across the resort from the main house. And she's slowly working her way over. She's got she's got a basket in one hand and a plate in the other. And then I step out onto the deck and I greet her as she comes. And she hands me a plate of venison with venison and stew and rice. And the basket had Nutri-Grain bars and a bunch of other snacks and stuff like that I could have throughout the night. And she told me that she was 94 years old. and she's the one that does all the cleaning of all the cabins. Like after
Oh,
someone
man.
stays there, she goes and she does the sweeping and everything like that. And I'm like, ma'am, it's like you do all that work, really? And then she just said that she feels like she's called to do this. She's called to provide like this service for people to come to this resort and be by the lake and be at peace and kind of just reconnect with nature again. She felt like this was a calling for her, and so she told me that's what chalks up to her having all this energy to do all this cleaning, to walk this food for me because she knew that it was gonna help. It was gonna help me, and so I just thought you just made me think of that when I just heard your story. But it just goes back to just like these types of moments, and then just how much gratitude I have when I get to meet and connect with people like that.
That's an awesome story. I mean, that was her mission, her ministry that kept her going. Yeah, her purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we are just about at an hour. So what I want to move on to next here is, I know you have a book out right now. So, can you give us a little bit of a synopsis on it? And yeah, just tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Well, available starting April 16th. My book is called Take Less, Do More: Surprising Life Lessons on Generosity, Gratitude, and Curiosity from an Ultralight Backpacker. And the book is, so I've worked for roughly 50 years now, lightening my load, kind of starting with that bike trip in 76. Um, and along the way and the adventures I had as I was lightening the load, I realized that a lot of those, kind of as we've discussed, have applications to life in general. And so this book is taking those lessons that I learned, lightening my base pack weight essentially, and applying those to life.
All right. And how can we go about finding it?
It's available for pre-order now at any online bookseller, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It will be available on Gossamer Gear and Backpacking Light and Lightsmith, actually. And then, if you want to support your local bookstore, they can certainly order it.
All right. And I'll be sure to include links in the show notes for it so our listeners can go and find it there. Or if we have viewers watching our conversation on YouTube, they can find it in the description below. So quick and convenient to go click and find it.
Great.
All right, Glenn. So what I have for you next is I like to ask all my guests to issue a challenge to our listeners, because as I like to say that, information stories can be inspiring, but it does take like our listeners have to follow it up with action if they want to go out and do amazing things in their lives. So with that, what challenge would you issue to our listeners today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
I am inscribing books now for early readers, and I have a variety of things that I've come up with. But I think in terms of a challenge, I have a note on my phone that's labeled tattoos. Now, I don't have any tattoos, but if I was going to get one, and the reason I don't have tattoos is divorces would be very messy and expensive. Um, but it's an indication that these are things that I think are important enough to consider if I was going to get a tattoo. And I think a good summary and kind of challenge every day to live by is one of the notes on my tattoo list. And that is work hard, be nice, and stay curious.
Hmm. Work hard, be
Be
nice,
nice,
stay
stay
curious.
curious.
All right, right on, sir. All right, so what I have next for you is my final three. Again, these are three questions that I ask all my guests at the end of the show, and I like to think that they're fun questions, but I'll let you decide that for yourself when you hear them. And the first of these three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
I'm not sure I have a favorite place. I just love being outside. I mean, if I get to pick, it's probably above tree line, in the mountains, above tree line, off trail. Because I like my wilderness. The least curated, the better.
Agreed. Very good, sir. All right. So the next question. What is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
I won't live long enough to get my bucket list done. Um, well, one, I'm heading out next February to the Himalayas, and I've never been there.
Oh,
So that'll be something different for me and something fun. I have some friends who've really gotten into pack rafting, and that seems like it would be fun. So maybe I'll do that sometime. I would like to. I've got a folder labeled Triple Crown Project to kind of pick up the missing pieces of the big three trails. If I'm going to do that before I die, I probably need to start making some progress on that.
all righty. And the last three questions, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Favorite animal? Let's see. You know, I don't know if it's my favorite. I do like mountain lions, and I have seen a mountain lion on the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah, they're pretty prominent out there in California, aren't they?
Well, occasionally they pull down a cyclist or something, but yeah, they're hard to see, but they are out there definitely.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, I'm trying to think. That might be a first. Actually, I think all your responses might be first answers to these questions. So we might be 3 for 3 for originality on these questions. So
This is not the first indication to me that I'm a little bit different.
all right, awesome. All right, well, Glenn, that's it. That's all the questions that I have for you today. But before we call it a day here, let's just go over again where our listeners can go, pick up a copy of the book, and also where they can connect with you, like out on the internet space. So, website, social media accounts. What do you got for us?
Sure. So the book they can get at any online retailer or order at your local bookstore. Or Gossamer Gear, Backpacking Light, or lightsmith.com. And best way to connect to me is probably I'm active on Instagram and LinkedIn. They can just shoot me an email at glenn@glenvanpeski.com or fill out a contact form on my website, which is glenvanpeski.com. And I have all sorts of resources there. You can sign up for my every other week newsletter, which notifies you of blog posts and anything going on with the book and any events that I'm at or podcasts I'm on. And I've also got gear lists there. I've got, kind of trip reports and things like that a lot of people find helpful.
All right. Well, like I mentioned, I'll be leaving links in the show notes for this episode. So our listening can go find them there, or they can find them in the description below if they're watching the video on YouTube. All right. Well, Glenn, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for joining me today. I know we kind of just got put this interview together on kind of short notice, so I appreciate you being flexible, and also just appreciate you just being here and being willing to share your stories and your insights with myself and the listeners today. This has been great.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I thank you for your service in defense of our freedoms and your service of just being of service to others through your podcast and your work in the Peace Corps. So I appreciate that. And that's really what makes the world work. It's people like you.
Absolutely agree. All right. Thank you very much, sir.